There's never been a time when I've not been honored and happy to join either in person or virtually to remember the time when Hamilton Holmes and I chose the University of Georgia to prepare to realize our dreams, Hamp to become a doctor, and yours truly to become a journalist. And while I'm miles away from this gathering today, I am close in head and heart, as I was with Hamp and also with his family, who were always there for us, helping to polish our armor they had helped create with their values, values that gave us a first-class sense of ourselves, even when there were those who wanted to keep us in a place of inferiority and out of UGA, among other places. And so today, I know when you hear from Marilyn Holmes, Hamilton's wife and mother of his wonderful children, you will be inspired, as we were, to keep on keeping on our journey towards a more perfect union. For while it's abundantly clear that we have had our victories that opened the doors of UGA some 61 years ago to all, regardless of race, creed, color, or national origin or sexual preference, we need ongoing inspiration to help prepare our Georgia dogs to keep on keeping on. For we're seeing challenges beyond its doors that would turn back the clock and keep the history that helped propel Hamp and me from being taught. And so today, I know Marilyn's words will polish the armor of all who hear her words so that all of us can ensure our history is preserved and taught to all. And so that, like our Georgia dogs, we can be victorious, confronting tough challenges in the field and everywhere else. And in the case of our history, defeat those among us who don't want our history taught. But our history here at UGA teaches us that no matter the obstacles, we can overcome, and beautifully at that. And I know Marilyn Holmes will inspire us to keep our history alive and well in our classrooms and in society so that we protect and preserve the history that instructs us to regard with respect and appreciation all God's children, again, regardless of race, creed, color, national origin, or sexual preference, and to appreciate the meaning of the words of the great Zora Neale Hurston: we are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond. So it is with great pride that this mama dog welcomes Marilyn Holmes and the Holmes family to keep our history and our hope alive. Go Marilyn, go all dogs!
Good afternoon and welcome to the 2022 Holmes-Hunter Lecture. This annual lecture serves as an important opportunity for our community to honor two of the University of Georgia's most iconic individuals, the late Dr. Hamilton Holmes Sr. and Ms. Charlene Hunter Gall, who we just heard from. Charlene Hunter Gall graduated in 1963 and later became an experienced journalist, working at PBS and at CNN for several years, where she served as the network's bureau chief and correspondent in Johannesburg, South Africa. Throughout her career, Charlene has received numerous awards, including 2 National News and Documentary Emmy Awards, as well as 2 prestigious Peabody Awards. Charlene and her husband have established an endowment here at the University of Georgia that is focused on inspiring and supporting students in projects that give voice to the voiceless. Charlene, we hate that you and Ron could not be with us today, but we appreciate your ongoing support, and frankly, we appreciate reminding everyone that we just won a national championship a few weeks ago. Dr. Hamilton Holmes graduated from the University of Georgia cum laude with a Bachelor of Science degree in 1963. He later became the first African-American student to be admitted to Emory University School of Medicine, where he graduated in 1967. After receiving his medical degree, Hamilton spent his career in the medical field, where he became the medical director and the head of orthopedic surgery at Grady Memorial Hospital. We lost Dr. Holmes far too quickly, but his legacy lives on through his wonderful family, including his wife, Marilyn, and daughter, Allison, who we will hear from shortly, and his son, Hamilton Jr., who is in attendance today. Marilyn, we thank you for agreeing to serve as our speaker today. We look forward to hearing all that you and Allison will share with us. Since Charlene and Hamilton first stepped through the arch, a great deal has changed for the better, as Charlene noted earlier. I would point out that our academic building now proudly bears the Holmes-Hunter name, and we will shortly begin a $30 million renovation project on that facility. Diversity and inclusion are now core values of this institution, and we continue our work to build a more welcoming and inclusive learning environment at the University of Georgia. This lecture is an important part of our commitment to cultivate a vibrant exchange of ideas at the University of Georgia. And I would like to extend my sincere thanks and appreciation to all of you that are joining us here today for this important event. Thank you.
Marilyn Holmes, a native of Detroit, Michigan, is a longtime friend and supporter of the University of Georgia. Many of you may know her husband, the late Dr. Hamilton Holmes Sr., one of the first 2 Black students to attend the University of Georgia in 1961, and the namesake of today's lecture. Mrs. Holmes spent her career as an educator prior to retiring in 2003. Since then, she has volunteered as a reading tutor in Atlanta Public Schools and Quality Living Services Senior Center. She is a former board member of the Atlanta History Center and past chair of the Atlanta Speech School Board of Advisors. Along with all of these endeavors, she remains active in her local chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and is an alumna member of the Links Incorporated. At UGA, Mrs. Holmes has helped open doors for students and continues to make UGA a more inclusive campus through her advocacy and generosity in support of the 1961 Club, the Hamilton E. Holmes Professorship, and the School of Social Work and the Franklin College of Arts and Sciences. Mrs. Holmes is joined today by her daughter, Allison Johnson, and we know that they will provide an engaging conversation and give insightful details about one of the most notable UGA families. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Marilyn Holmes and Mrs. Allison Johnson.
Thank you, Chloe. And hello, everyone. We are delighted to be here with you today, and I can't wait for you to learn more about my mother, Marilyn Holmes. She is a mentor to me, and she has been a guiding light in my life. And I know my brother, who is here as well, feels the same way. She's just very special. So without further delay, let's get started. Now, Mom, you're not originally from Atlanta, so please talk a little about your family, where you were raised, and some of the schools you attended early in your life.
Okay, that'll be fun and easy to do. And as people used to say, I'm one of those Yankees who came south and stayed. I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and was the product of a normal middle-class family. My parents were Kenneth and Estelle Vincent. I have a sister, Jean, who still lives in Detroit, younger sister, by the way, although in recent years, she likes to think that she's the older sister. So I have to rattle her chain every once in a while to remind her. But she is wonderful and love her dearly. When I was about 5 years old, our family moved into a neighborhood, which was where our first home was to be, just recently purchased. And it was a very nice house in a middle class, mostly white neighborhood. My mother was a stay-at-home mom because my sister was young, and at that time there weren't daycare centers like there are now. She was active in our church community, in the PTA, was a fabulous cook, made the best fried chicken and lemon pies. Our dad was a person who loved to work in his garden, and he grew green onions and radishes, most of which were consumed before he got back in the house, but he enjoyed doing that. He built a playhouse on the side of our house, taught us how to shoot baskets and to fish. I had two daughters, so he decided we need to learn some of those things as well. The neighbors that I remember pretty fondly were a Catholic family a few doors down from us that had a daughter, Mary Kay Larden, who was my age, and a few doors the other side of us, a Jewish family that had a son, Michael Corman, and another child, Lois, who was my sister's age. Now, we played together all the time, and the only thing that I could see was that we liked each other because we liked to play together. The families didn't really socialize then, but there didn't seem to be any kind of problems among us. There was a lady next door, an elderly white lady, Mrs. Gidley, who seemed to always appear when my parents were out working in the backyard. They had a friendly relationship, over the fence kind of conversations, but it was fine. When I was going to kindergarten at the local school, I don't remember the composition of the school as far as ethnicities were concerned. I do remember one little girl, a white girl, that seemed to like me enough to tell me one day that her mother had given her permission to come home with me after school. And I brought her home with me after school. I don't remember much more about what happened after that, but needless to say, that was the only time that happened. So you want to know about the schools I went to? Okay. So beyond the early years in elementary school, I do remember my 5th and 6th grade years when I was chosen by our beloved auditorium teacher. Yes, auditorium was a class with a space on the report card for a grade. We did 2 plays. One was Hansel and Gretel, and I was selected to be Gretel. And Hansel was a blonde, blue-eyed Kenneth Ingle. I don't remember any backlash from that, and it was fun to do. The next year, we did the Nutcracker, and I was selected to be Clara. And not only did I do Clara's part in one performance, but I was the Sugar Plum Fairy in the other one. Now, this was a mostly white school, faculty and students, but I don't recall any kinds of problems at that point. As I went to junior high school in 7th grade in Detroit, the student population had begun to change. More African-American families were moving into the community and were attending that school. There were some African-American teachers on the faculty, not many. But here again, I don't remember much in the way of confrontations that caused any problems, except that in my 8th grade year, we got news that algebra was not going to be available to 9th grade students. And it was a decision made by the assistant principal, who was white. And he made that decision based on his information that we were not likely to be students who would go on to college. So we didn't need algebra. Well, that's when my sweet mother became a quiet militant. She got herself together with a group and went to visit the school and talked about why this was not a good decision. And the next thing I knew, we had algebra in 9th grade. Now, I tell you that because it was important that we have that math in order to take the test to get into Cass Technical High School, which was the magnet school in downtown Detroit. And sure enough, algebra was on that exam. Those of us lucky enough to qualify started in 10th grade. And it was a huge school, 8 stories tall, block square, with 5,000 students at that time. And there were students from all over the city. So it really was a more diverse population, even though it was mostly white. But this was the first time that I had really seen Asian students that were coming to the school.
Talk a little about the dynamics in the school. So now in high school, there's a little more socialization, involvement in activities. Did children from all those diverse backgrounds participate as such?
They did. And Cass was a school that had a varied curriculum, and it was almost like being in a small college because there was science, there was electrical engineering, there was art and music, all those kinds of things. Each one of those had an after-school club that students could join. And as I look back recently at my yearbook, there were students of all ethnicities in these clubs. So there were ample opportunities for that to happen. And everything seemed to go well in that regard.
So you mentioned that some of your early experiences in school, you didn't really recall instances of racism or, and I think sometimes we get the impression that the North was more progressive. And so there were not racial issues and not a lot of civil rights activities. Do you recall some incidents, though, in the city of Detroit or anything that stands out to you, perhaps outside of school, where you encountered either overt or subtle instances of racism?
Oh, yes, I do. And I remember some of them very, very well. The first was when I was about 11 years old, I was involved in an Episcopal group. And in Detroit at that time, there were African-American Episcopalians, but generally, we don't make up a large percentage of Episcopalians in this country. But I was part of a group, as I said, that went to the Women's City Club in downtown Detroit. This was a prestigious women's club, all white. And we were supposed to make a presentation. And when we arrived, we were invited to have a seat. Our chaperone was taken quietly away for a short time and then came back and took me quietly away. And he said to me, if anyone asks you what you are, tell them you're an Indian. Now, he meant Asian Indian. And at that time, there were a lot of young Indian students studying in that area. At 11 years old, I didn't know quite what to make of it. And I didn't want to cause any trouble for our chaperone. So I went along with what they asked me to do. No one questioned me, but I was prepared to answer if I needed to. Another instance was, let's see, what else did I want to tell you about?
You talked about a time going to a conference in DC.
Yes, that's right. Went to the White House Conference on Children and Youth, again with the same organization. And when I arrived, we were being assigned roommates. And again, there were not a lot of African-American Episcopalians. As a matter of fact, I don't remember seeing any. But the young lady assigned to room with me was Karen Knife, who was a Native American, full-blood Sioux from South Dakota. Now, we ended up roommates by design or by chance. I'll never know. But at any rate, it was a good experience for us. We got along very well. We wrote to each other after this period of time. But yet here again was something that I had to face on my own. And I told my mother and father about it afterward, but I began to realize that there might be other times in my life in Detroit that I would be challenged in some way, and I needed to learn how to handle those times. Okay.
Can you tell me about another instance when you, I guess it was in 67, you were actually in Detroit during riots?
Yes, yes. That was a very scary time. Hamp had finished medical school and was to be in Detroit to start his residency in July. And we got there at the very end of June and moved in with my parents because our new apartment wasn't ready yet. And just barely a few weeks later, the riot started, and he was still at the hospital at that point, trying desperately to get home. And we told him, no, don't come. And that evening, my mother and I stood out on our porch and watched as 2.5 blocks in one direction, 2.5 blocks in the other, the city was burning. And the sky was blood red. And we yet felt isolated and perhaps insulated because of where we were on a side street, not on the main streets. But it was a terrible riot. Many people were killed. Yes, it was a race riot. But that was a time when my mother also told me about race riots that had happened in Detroit. As a matter of fact, one the year I was born. She never talked about that.
That sounds like it was certainly a terrifying time. You mentioned Dad. So speaking of Dad, you were from Detroit and he was from Atlanta. I want you to tell the story of how you met. And it's been a while since you've told it publicly, but I think it is pretty remarkable. So please share.
Okay. Well, it's also a story that we said if our children had told us, we would have said, no, 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 this will never be. What happened was the summer of 1964, I was in Philadelphia attending a sorority convention, and he was working for SmithKline Beecham, and was invited to be an escort for some of the social events at the Sheraton Hotel downtown. I was running for a national office, so I didn't sign up to get an escort. So as the evening approached and it was time to go down, other girls in my delegation began to be paired up with people, and I didn't have a name. So I was directed to go into a ballroom to have a look. Well, you know, a hotel ballroom without tables and chairs is just a big empty room. These guys were literally lined up around the room. And I thought, oh no, I cannot do this. I turned around to walk out, and he walked out behind me. We went back to the registration table, and we explained our situation, and the lady literally said, well, neither of you has a, and so she said, why don't you? And we did. That was Monday night, and Tuesday was my birthday, 21st birthday, my parents called to wish me happy birthday. And she said, "Are you having a good time?" I said, "I have fallen in love." She said, "You just got there." And I said, "How long does it take?" And she said, "You get on the bus and come home." So I didn't go home. I stayed. I won the election, and on Thursday night, Ham proposed and I accepted.
Yes. And as you shared with me, as we were preparing to come over, that the proposal was actually in a fast food drive-up.
Yes.
I did not know that.
It was
So,
fast food drive-up.
so 4 days.
Right.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So had you heard much about him at the time that you met, and in those magical 4 days, did he talk about his experience at Georgia at all?
No, we only had eyes for each other. We were both busy during the day. I was campaigning, he was working. We would get together in the evening. We walked, I'm sure, every inch of Philadelphia at night. And he took me to meet the family he was living with, but he didn't talk much about his time at Georgia. By this time, he was in medical school. And we just both really talked about our futures, careers, that sort of thing.
And at that time when he entered Georgia, you were graduating from high school. So you were pretty busy yourself.
I was indeed. That was the January of '61. And since, as I said, we had such a large graduating class, I graduated in January in a class of 375 students. And it was toward the end of January. And just maybe 2 weeks or less later, I was a freshman at Wayne. So it wasn't that I wasn't interested, it was that we were just involved in other things. But our campus had been involved in supporting freedom riders and doing other things on our campus that would help with the registration process.
You mentioned that Dad was in med school when you met. I think he was a junior or in his third year at that time. Talk about your experience with Emory, and did you have occasion to socialize with the other students in his class or their spouses?
Well, his experience at Emory, of course, was very different than his experience at Georgia. And yes, the faculty and staff members knew that he was a newlywed, and there were some events that they hosted and I was invited to. So I had a chance to meet some of the other wives who were also, many of whom were teachers, and some nurses and some in other fields. But I had a chance to get to know them. And there were events that were hosted by some of the wives, and I was invited. So he played on the medical school basketball team. Yes. And so I went to those games and we cheered for them from the bleachers, not on the floor. Okay. We were not about to get out on the floor and do any cheers, but yes, it was a good time. And some of those couples that we got to be friendly with, we still are to this day.
And you entered the teaching profession. And where did you begin your career in Atlanta?
Well, my career in Atlanta was actually the beginning period. I started at Kirkwood Elementary School, which is now in an apartment complex, I believe. But that summer was when many African-American teachers were reassigned to schools that were all white schools. It was pretty much that way rather than white teachers being transferred. But it seemed to work fairly well. And I was pleased to find that there were a few white children still there. There were some white teachers that chose to stay. Most of the white faculty left, as did most of the white students. And unfortunately, most of the better books and supplies went with them. Here again, by design, by choice,
Mm,
who knows?
interesting. And then a few years later, y'all been married a couple of years now, you ended up in Germany with Dad when he was in the Army.
Mhm.
How did that come about, and what are some of your memories of that time?
Okay, when we went to Detroit in 1967, he was doing, 1969, wait a minute, 1967, he was starting his internship and residency. So I was pregnant at the time. I had hoped to be able to teach, but the laws at that point would not allow me to. So I did some volunteer work in some of the Detroit public schools. And our son Hamilton was born.
Mhm.
So I spent those years being a new mom and doing the volunteer work when I could. Since
When did you all go
I
to
was just
Germany?
going to say, I'm
Yeah.
trying to remember, I think it was 1969. Yeah, that's when we went. That was during the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
So a lot of doctors were needed in Vietnam, but also a lot were needed in Europe as well. And so he got an accompanied tour of 3 years, which meant that we were able to go with him. So we moved first to a small town in northern Bavaria. The local people there were very used to having minorities in that area. So we didn't have any problems. We lived in the house, actually we had our own apartment, but it was owned by a local German family. The wife worked on the base. She spoke pretty good English. The husband had a disability, so he was a house husband. And in his limited English and my limited German, we did pretty well. And after a while, though, it was better because I had actually minored in German in college, so it was good. We got to be very good friends with a Jewish family there that were military as we were, and we are still in touch with each other today, even though they live in California.
Now, I came along while you were in Germany.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. When we moved to Nuremberg. And you did come along when we were living in US housing. Our family, because of your dad's rank, we were put into a housing unit where not only was he of superior rank, but he was the only African-American.
Okay.
The building across from us had one African-American officer, and so on down the line. So even though, there was racial segregation, there was also segregation by rank. Yeah, so you were born in Nuremberg, had a funny looking little birth certificate, but we had some good years there. One friend that I made that I remember very well was a young woman from Iowa. Her husband was a dentist, and he was one rank below my husband, and he was friendly but cordial. But his wife and I got to be very good friends. One day she wanted to take me to a restaurant that they frequented quite a bit, and we sat there for a long time without anyone coming to attend us. And she said, "Oh, what's going on?" And I thought, well, I think we have a little problem here. I didn't want to go into a whole lot of detail, but finally she said, "Well, what is it?" And I said, "It's me." And so she sat there as tears welled up in her eyes and said, "No." And I said, "Yes." So what really let me know was that here was a young woman that could really be empathetic toward me and what I was feeling. But when we left, she said, "We are never coming back here." So, but that's, we stayed in touch for a long time after they left Germany.
You told me that until she came to Germany, she's from Iowa, she came to Germany, she had not had any interaction with African Americans previously. So
And I had not even seen any, she said.
So So you returned to the States and went back to Atlanta and settled into raising a family.
Mhm.
And I remember during those years when you were not working outside of the home, that you were always busy. You were on the go, you were constantly at school, and not because we were in trouble, but you were just volunteering, and you were involved in many educational organizations as well during that time period. What drove you to be active in those kinds of organizations?
Well, again, I think it goes back to my work with youth groups in my church. And I always enjoyed helping younger people with things, games, with homework, with crafts. And as I got older, I enjoyed it even more, and then began to take on leadership roles. I was a counselor, or the person in charge of a program. And so it just continued. And even in the Army, I was volunteering and organizing things to the point where I was made Army Community Services Volunteer Coordinator. So not that I was always looking to be in charge, but sometimes things just fell my way, and I was happy to do what I could.
What about when you became a volunteer PE teacher at my school? I just learned this last night. I did not remember. So,
well, that's because at one time funding for Atlanta Public Schools was significantly reduced, and particularly in art and in PE. And so our PTA got together and we talked about the skills that we had in the different areas. And so I ended up doing PE and art. And at your school, I may not have had your class, but it was something that I felt it was important to do. And I was glad to be able to do it.
And then after a little more than 2 decades, you decided to return to teaching in the classroom.
I did. And that really was quite interesting. I was sitting watching you play soccer the spring of your senior year with the moms of 2 of your classmates, 2 white ladies I had known since you all were in elementary school. And they had gone back to teaching and encouraged me to give it a try. So I checked into what the procedures and possibilities were, found out I could take the teacher's certification test. And so I got some books from the library, and an Emory faculty friend gave me some books on ed psych. So I did a 2-week crash course. I thought I was ready until I got there. And there were all these newly minted grads waiting to go to their classrooms, and those who had just gotten advanced degrees. And I thought, what in the world am I doing here? And to top it off, your dad said, what makes you think you can do this after all these years? Well, I think part of it was just to inspire me to motivate me to go on. So I took the test, and when the envelope came, it was a thin envelope, and I'm expecting a big packet, right? So I stood by the mailbox and opened it up, and it said, "We are pleased," and that was all I needed to see.
Yes.
So I started at a school in Northeast Atlanta, and it was mainly white at that time, faculty, students, and I had a very good experience there. And after 4 years, this mostly white faculty elected me Teacher of the Year for our school. I went on to be Teacher of the Year for the elementary division, and then for the city of Atlanta. So it was really quite an honor.
It was a night. It was quite a night. Congratulations again.
Oh, thank you.
So talk a little bit about your time after retirement. What have you been doing?
I haven't been volunteering as much, but I did, as my young soror mentioned, worked with senior citizens at a senior center near me on improving their reading skills, some of whom actually went on to take the tests to try to get into programs in the school system. Some were having a real struggle at first, but I enjoyed working with them. I really did. And then also I had an opportunity to be invited to join the Board of Advisors at the Atlanta Speech School. And I was more than willing to do that, especially since I had taught some of the students that had come through there. And so after a short while, I was asked to chair that board. And I accepted that willingly.
I do want to share a quick story about the time when you were volunteering at the senior center. And she was pretty much teaching a reading class to seniors, many of whom had not completed high school and were not very advanced in their reading. And she was just so dedicated over a 4 or 5 year period and really just stopped because of COVID. But she would prepare lesson plans, I think, and copy materials and give them homework assignments. And she shared with me one student who had advanced enough in her reading that she finally felt confident in reading a book to her own grandchild. And that was very meaningful to her. And I know it was meaningful to you that you played a small part in that. So I just think that was just very special.
Oh, thank you.
To share that. So let's shift and talk a little about UGA. Growing up, I really don't remember Dad talking much about his time here. I have a vivid memory of coming over, I must have been in middle school, coming to a football game and was really excited to be in the box to watch the game. So that was kind of a highlight for me, but I really didn't know much about his experience here until I read Calvin Trillin's book, An Education in Georgia. And I was in college by that point. What do you remember that Dad shared with you about his time here? I know that you mentioned he didn't talk a whole lot about it, but anything else that you can recall?
Well, it was a long time before he could really talk much about it because it hadn't been a real pleasant experience, except when he lived with the Killian family. They were a lovely family who invited him into their home, to enjoy family life, home-cooked meals, even to the point of amassing people with guns to come and protect the house at night. And so he did talk about them, but there wasn't a lot that he really wanted to share. And it was Fred Davidson, President Davison, actually, that started the process of getting him back into the fold, because the bicentennial was going to take place. And President Davison invited him in 1983 to come to be on the planning committee.
Was that sort of the transition of him really becoming a Georgia Bulldog?
It was starting there, yeah. It was a good thing it did, because it was 1986 when your brother graduated, so he had to make a quick turnaround. But in addition to that, then he became a trustee. And that gave him an opportunity to really be on the inside of what was going on at the university, not just football games and things like that. And it really opened his eyes to the kinds of things that were happening. And he was glad to be a part of that. And then, of course, the lecture, Holmes-Hunter lecture, was established in 1985. And the bicentennial anniversary medal was presented to him and Charlene and Vernon Jordan, who was the first lecturer. So after that, he began to kind of say, this really is my alma mater.
So you referenced the lecture, and then we know there's the academic building named for Dad and Charlene Hunter Galt. There was the wonderful Foot Soldier for Justice project by Dr. Daniels and Dr. Aldridge. I believe there's been a 40th, a 50th, and a 60th anniversary of the desegregation here. And in Atlanta, there's a school and a major street named after him. How do you feel when you see or participate in some of these various moments of recognition, and how do you think they will contribute to keeping his legacy alive?
Well, early on, it was very difficult to be a part of some of those celebrations because it was just
Very
it was
emotional.
hard.
Yeah.
It was very emotional, very hard. And yet I didn't want to refuse because it was important that these things be done and that he be recognized. And I think those things you mentioned will always be visual reminders of that legacy. But I think in addition, it's important to note that the way he and those that came behind him led their lives with respect of self, respect for others, pursuit of educational excellence. Those kinds of things will be part of their legacies as well.
Mhm. I agree. So I have one last question for you, comment.
Okay.
So Dad died at the young age of 54.
Yeah.
And his first grandchild and namesake, Hamilton Holmes III, was born less than 2 weeks after his death. That first grandchild is now 26 years old. What have you shared with his 4 grandchildren about him, and what is it that you want them to know about him?
Well, other than answering questions from time to time or helping them when I think 2 or 3 of them did reports and helped them with research or things that they have picked up on their own. I think I want them to know the kind of person that he was.
Mhm.
He was a very kind and caring man, father, husband, brother, and looked for the best in people, always tried to anyway. He was dedicated to his profession.
Mhm.
He loved his family, and those aren't in order. You know, sometimes they reversed, but I think it's important to say that. He loved coming to events to support you all when he could. He loved watching old movies. He
Mhm.
loved sports.
Mhm.
He loved to travel.
Mhm.
And he was just a good person.
Mhm. One of the things I remember is that he had this full body laugh, just this infectious laugh that would make others laugh. And you mentioned that sometimes he wasn't able to attend events that my brother and I were involved in, or he might be late just because of the nature of his work. But when he was there, it really meant a lot. We knew he had really put in the effort for that.
Right.
And I will, as far back as I can remember, every morning he made hot breakfast for his children, and he packed our lunch, and he took us to the bus stop. I think he just never knew what the day was going to bring or how late he might come home, but that morning was that quality time that he always had with us that I will never forget. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mom, I think we're going to wrap up today, and I thank you for sharing a bit about yourself and Dad with the Georgia community. And as always, we are always happy to come back to Georgia. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Allison. It's been a pleasure. We've learned things about each other, haven't we?
Yes.
And to those of you that are visiting with us today, I just want to thank you so much. You've supported many of the things that Hamilton was involved with, and I'm so glad that you are here to hear a little bit about my story today.
Well, we learned a great deal about your story, indeed, Miss Marilyn. We learned that someone can take a 20-year break from the classroom and still come back and be the teacher of the year.
Well.
So not just come back and do it, but come back and do it well. And thank you for coming and sharing so many of these inspirational words. We also learned a lot about Mr. Hamilton, and if nothing else, we learned that he was very decisive. And the type of doctor I would want. That it took only 4 days for him to know what he wanted prescribed for the rest of his life, and you as his wife. And so, I think that your words today have shed so much light on him, and been a great inspiration for us to hear how his relationship with the University of Georgia evolved over the years, a place that, he saw as trouble to talk about, that was difficult for him to discuss with his friends. But I think what I take most from him is that he didn't stop there, and he didn't let that stop him from being involved and remaining involved, from coming back and making a difference, from coming to being a trustee, to where he could really create some positive change that we get to see in the world-class institution that the University of Georgia is today. So thank you to you, Allison. Thank you to you and Hamilton Jr. for all the sacrifices that you all made in sharing him, not just with the University of Georgia, but with our entire state. Because as a doctor, he had a great impact on not just the University of Georgia, but our state as well. For your words, Ms. Holmes, we have a small token of appreciation, for you that we would love for you to have and take with you.
Well, thank you so much. Oh my goodness.
So you all join me in giving Ms. Holmes one more round of applause. Thank you. Last year, the Alumni Association announced the creation of an award that will recognize the contributions of UGA alumni that have followed in the footsteps of Hamilton, Charlene, and Mary Frances. To present the inaugural Footsteps Award, I would like to welcome Ms. Yvette Daniels, a 1986 and 1989 graduate and the current president of the UGA Alumni Association.
Thank you, Alton. Mrs. Holmes, thank you so much sharing and letting us see a little bit of your life. My mother was a teacher in the Atlanta public school system, so it was nice reflecting with you and hearing your stories and you sharing a part of your family. Allison, the same for you. I loved watching you talk about with your mom what that was like, so thank you again for sharing. In the spring of 2021, during the University of Georgia's celebration of the 60th anniversary of desegregation, the University of Georgia Alumni Association announced that a new award would be given to a UGA graduate in honor of Charlene Herner-Galt, Hamilton Holmes, and Mary Frances Early. This award, named the Footsteps Award, recognizes the momentous steps taken so that others could follow in their footsteps. The award is given to a graduate who has made a significant positive impact in human rights, race relations, or education in their community. On behalf of the University of Georgia Alumni Association, I am pleased to announce that the inaugural Footsteps Award goes to Eugenia Harvey, who graduated in 1982 with a degree in broadcast journalism. Ms. Harvey is the Chief DEI Officer at WNET, New York Public Media, America's flagship PBS station. In this role and in previous roles, she brings diverse and underrepresented stories to light and diversifies the talent behind the camera and in front of the camera. Her impactful work promotes social justice through solution-focused dialogues and inspires audiences and places of business to improve the world. Congratulations, Eugenia. We look forward to celebrating the accomplishment with you in the near future. Thank you.
Well, what a treat it has been to hear from our amazing speakers today. We leave here today with more knowledge about the life of a woman who supported Hamilton, who is such an important figure in our history here at UGA, not just here at the University of Georgia, but our state as well. We leave with more understanding about what life has been like for the Holmes family over the years since Hamilton left us, living in the spotlight while also serving as leaders in your community and leaving a legacy that he would be proud of. We also leave with more love for each of the two of you, for all that you shared with us today. All of you for joining us. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to participate in the Holmes-Hunter Signature Lecture. Thank you for being with us, and as always, go Dogs.